On my anniversary, my husband brought his mistress home. She lives here now. He didn't expect what happened next. The scent of vanilla and roses filled the air as I set the last wine glass on the dining table. The candles flickered, casting soft shadows across the room, and the soft hum of a romantic melody played in the background. Tonight was our anniversary, and despite the rough patches in our marriage lately, I wanted to believe we could find our way back to each other. I glanced at my reflection in the window, adjusting the deep red dress that once made his eyes linger on me for hours. A part of me felt foolish for trying so hard, but wasn't that what love was? Holding on, even when things felt shaky. I checked the time. 8:15 p.m. He was late. Again. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay positive. Maybe he was caught up at work. Maybe he was planning some surprise of his own. I imagined him walking through the door with flowers, pulling me into his arms, whispering something sweet in my ear. But the sound that finally came wasn't the turn of his key in the lock. It was laughter. A woman's laughter. My heart stopped as I turned toward the door. The front lock clicked, the door swung open, and there he stood, my husband, still wearing his work suit, his tie loosened, his arm draped around the waist of a woman I had never seen before. She was stunning. Long, wavy brunette hair, a form-fitting black dress, and a smug smile that made my stomach churn. She held on to him like he was hers, like she had every right to be here. He looked at me and grinned. "Oh, good? You're still up. Still up. Still up." I had spent hours preparing this dinner, waiting for him, hoping that tonight would be the night he remembered who we were. And here he was, walking in with another woman, acting as if nothing were out of place. My fingers trembled as I gripped the back of the chair, willing myself not to crumble. "Do not break. Do not let them see you break." He turned to her and laughed. "Babe, this is my wife. Well, for now." My breath caught in my throat. "For now." She tilted her head, studying me like I was some relic from the past. Then she smirked. "I was wondering when we'd finally meet," she said, stepping further inside, into my home, into my life, as if she belonged here. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Who is she?" My voice came out calm, too calm. He sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "This is Camila," he said casually, like I had just asked him to introduce a business colleague and not the woman he was clearly sleeping with. Camila. The name felt like venom in my mouth. She extended a hand, mocking me with a condescending sweetness. "I know this must be hard for you, but it's better to just accept it. I'm not going anywhere." The room spun. The candles flickered violently as a draft swept in from the open door. My beautifully set table, our anniversary dinner, felt like a cruel joke. I turned to him. "Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." His expression hardened, the last bit of patience in his face evaporating. "Listen," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "I was going to talk to you about this, but honestly, I didn't think you'd take it well. Camila and I have been together for a while now, and we decided it's time to stop sneaking around. She's moving in." The words hit me like a slap. She's moving in. I wanted to scream, to throw the wine glasses, to tear through the carefully planned evening I had spent so much time putting together. Instead, I stared at him, unblinking, expressionless. He shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, don't be dramatic. You knew we weren't happy. Honestly, you should be thanking me. This makes things easier for everyone." Thanking him? My grip on the chair tightened, my nails digging into the polished wood. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't want to be the bad guy. You don't have to leave right away. You can stay in the guest room until you figure things out." I almost laughed. Almost. But something inside me snapped instead. My mind raced, calculating, adapting, shifting. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all compressed into something sharp, something dangerous. I slowly released the chair and smoothed out the wrinkles in my dress. My voice came out steady, eerily calm. "Fine." His brow furrowed. "Fine." I nodded, walking over to the table, carefully lifting the wine bottle and pouring myself a glass. "Yes, if that's what you want." Camila's lips curled into a victorious smirk. She thought she had won. She thought I was defeated. But my husband, he wasn't so sure. His smile faltered as he studied me. "You're not mad?" I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the deep red liquid move in slow, deliberate circles. Why should I be? His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Something about my reaction, about my stillness, was unsettling him. Good. I took a sip of my wine, holding his gaze over the rim of the glass. She lives here now. I echoed his earlier words. He nodded slowly. I set the glass down and smiled. Then let's make her feel at home. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. For the first time since he walked in, he looked uneasy. Because what he didn't realize, what neither of them realized, was that I wasn't going anywhere either. They wanted to make me invisible in my own home. Fine. Let them think they won. But this wasn't over. Not even close. The silence in the room was suffocating. My husband and his mistress stood frozen, as if they were waiting for me to crack, for me to scream, cry, or beg. But I did none of those things. I simply smiled, took another sip of my wine, and let the weight of their decision settle over us. I told them I'd make her feel at home. And I meant it. But as I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, no, not ours anymore, his, I felt the walls closing in around me. The house that once held memories of love, laughter, and whispered secrets now felt like an unfamiliar place. Like I was the stranger here. The floorboards creaked under my heels as I entered the bedroom, my fingers grazing the frame of our wedding photo on the dresser. I stared at it, my reflection blending with the frozen smiles of the past. How many times had I stood here, fixing my makeup before a date, or folding his shirts, or simply sitting in bed, waiting for him to come home. Now, all those moments felt like ghosts. With a deep breath, I turned away and moved toward the closet. If I was going to stay, I needed to reclaim something, anything, that was still mine. I reached for a suitcase and yanked it out, but just as I unzipped it, I heard footsteps behind me. Him. He stood in the doorway, watching me carefully. You're really okay with this? I let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. Would you change anything if I wasn't? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He had the audacity to look conflicted, like he expected me to fight for him. When I didn't say anything else, he shifted his weight. Look, I don't want this to be hostile. I want us to be civil. Civil, the word tasted bitter on my tongue. I zipped up the suitcase, empty for now, and stood up. Don't worry. I won't cause any problems. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to figure me out. Then, with a small nod, he turned and walked away. Coward. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade before I sat down on the edge of the bed. My bed. My sanctuary. Or at least it had been. Now it felt contaminated. I stared at the ceiling, my hands clenched into fists. I refused to let them take everything from me. They could take my husband, they could take my peace, but they would not take my dignity. And they would never see me coming. The next morning, I woke to the sound of movement downstairs. Laughter. Hers. I clenched my jaw. I had spent years waking up to the sound of my husband's voice murmuring a sleepy good morning against my neck. Now, the first thing I heard was his mistress giggling in my kitchen. I dragged myself out of bed and pulled on a robe, forcing myself to stay calm. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. As I walked down the stairs, the scent of coffee and something frying filled the air. I turned the corner into the kitchen, and there she was, standing by the stove, barefoot, wearing my silk robe, flipping pancakes like she had always belonged here. She looked up and smiled. Morning! I stared at her. My robe. My kitchen. My life. She was making herself at home. And my husband, no, not mine anymore, sat at the counter, sipping coffee like this was normal. Like I was the intruder. I took a deep breath and walked past her, reaching for a mug. Two could play this game. I poured myself some coffee, moving with deliberate ease, then turned to lean against the counter, watching them. She smiled at me, syrup dripping off the edge of her pancake as she took a bite. I hope you don't mind. I figured since we're all living together now, we should start off on the right foot. Right foot? I took a slow sip of my coffee. Oh, I don't mind at all. Her smile faltered for a split second. She wasn't expecting that. I tilted my head. I want you to feel at home. I let the words sink in, my expression unreadable. And then, as if I hadn't just flipped the entire dynamic on its head, I set my cup down and walked away. I didn't need to fight them. Not yet. Because what they didn't know was that I had already started my plan. Days passed, and my house, began to change. It wasn't in the way it looked, but in the way it felt. It started small. The little things. The way I left doors slightly ajar at night, letting the wind cause soft creaks and whispers in the dark. The way I rearranged the kitchen, so nothing was where she last left it. The way lights flickered at the worst moments. The way the floorboards groaned just enough to make someone feel like they weren't alone. I watched as she started to get uneasy. One evening, as I sat in the living room reading, she walked in, rubbing her arms. "Does this house always make weird noises at night?" I didn't look up. "Oh, you'll get used to it." Her discomfort deepened over the next few days. She would glance over her shoulder when she walked down the hall. She'd wake up at odd hours, peering out the bedroom door. She even started triple-checking locks. It was delicious to watch, because this wasn't just a house. This was my home, and I was going to make sure she never felt at home in it. One evening, I caught her whispering to my husband in the corner of the hallway. "I swear, something feels off." He chuckled. "You're being dramatic." She frowned. "No. It's like," she hesitated, "like she's always watching." I passed by them at that moment, locking eyes with her just long enough to make her shiver. I smiled. Checkmate. This was only the beginning. She was unraveling. I could see it in the way her hands trembled when she reached for her coffee mug in the morning. The way her eyes darted around the house, as if expecting someone, to jump out at her. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed her sleepless nights, and her usual chirpy confidence was starting to crack. It was beautiful to watch. At first, she tried to pretend nothing was wrong. She still walked around in my silk robe, still made pancakes in my kitchen, still sat at my dining table, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. But I saw the way she gripped her fork, just a little too tightly. The way she startled whenever the floor creaked behind her. She was trying to convince herself she belonged here. But I knew better. One evening, I heard her whispering to my husband again. "I swear I hear things." His sigh was loud, irritated. "It's an old house. It makes noise." She shook her head. "No, it's not the house. It's her." I smiled to myself from the other room, dragging my fingers slowly across the wooden table, letting the soft sound fill the silence. Her voice dropped lower. "She's always watching. She's always there. It's like she knows something I don't." I did. I knew everything. And she was finally starting to feel it. That night, I took things a step further. I waited until I heard them go to bed, waited until the house settled into that eerie, heavy stillness. Then, I crept down the hallway and positioned myself just outside their bedroom door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, waiting. It took a while, but eventually, she must have felt it, that strange, crawling sensation of being watched. I heard the rustle of sheets, a sharp inhale, then a whisper. "Are you awake?" A groggy grunt from my husband. "What?" "I swear someone's out there." Silence. I let it stretch, thick and suffocating. Then, ever so gently, I dragged my fingertips down the wooden door. A soft, slow scratch, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Inside, the bed creaked. "Did you hear that?" she hissed. My husband groaned. "Go to sleep." I heard her breathing quicken. Good. Satisfied, I turned and walked away, my bare feet silent against the floor. She wouldn't sleep tonight. The next morning, she looked exhausted. She barely touched her breakfast, and her usual cheery tone was gone. She kept glancing toward me, like she was waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to reveal whatever game she thought I was playing. But I just sipped my coffee and smiled. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through her mind. Was I doing this on purpose? Was she imagining things? Was the house really haunted, or was I just making it feel that way? She didn't know, and that was the best part. By the end of the week, she was losing it. I found her in the hallway one afternoon, standing in front of the mirror, staring at herself. No, not at herself. At the space behind her. The empty space. She caught my reflection in the glass and spun around, her face pale. "You were behind me just now, weren't you?" I blinked. "No." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "I swear I saw something." I tilted my head. "Are you feeling okay?" She exhaled sharply and pushed past me. I heard her mutter under her breath as she disappeared down the hall. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. That night, she snapped. I was in my room, the guest room, as they now called it, when I heard her voice, sharp and angry. I know what you're doing. I looked up from my book as she stormed in, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her face tight with frustration. I raised an eyebrow. What exactly am I doing? You're messing with me. Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear underneath her anger. You move things. You make noises. You stare at me like you're waiting for me to break. I let the silence stretch, watching her unravel right in front of me. Then, I stood up slowly, taking a step toward her. She flinched. Ah, there it is. I smiled. Maybe you're just not cut out for this house. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She knew what I meant. This house had a heartbeat, a history. It didn't welcome intruders. And she was an intruder. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I let out a breath and leaned back against the dresser, my smile growing. She wouldn't last much longer. Not in my home. Not in my presence. And soon, very soon, she would realize the biggest mistake she ever made. Thinking she could take my place. She was at her limit. I could feel it. The house had become a prison for her, its walls closing in a little more each day. She walked around like a ghost of herself, eyes sunken, hands twitching, nerves frayed to the point of snapping. And I was ready to give her that final push. It started with the mirror. I waited until she was in the bathroom, washing her face, trying to shake the exhaustion clinging to her bones. When she lifted her head and looked into the mirror, she gasped. Because behind her, just for a fleeting second, she saw me, standing there, still, silent, watching. By the time she spun around, I was already gone. Her scream echoed through the house. I hid my smile. She ran to my husband that night, her voice shaking with desperation. I can't do this anymore. He sighed, rubbing his temples. What now? Her. She pointed toward the hallway, toward where I sat calmly in the living room. She's always there. She follows me. She never says anything, but I can feel her. It's like she's haunting me. I turned the page of my book, pretending not to listen. It's in your head, he muttered, tired of the conversation. You're acting paranoid. She laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. You don't get it, do you? She doesn't have to do anything. She just has to exist, and it's enough to drive me crazy. I tilted my head, pretending to look confused. You're acting like I've done something wrong. Her eyes snapped to mine, wild and furious. You know exactly what you're doing. I held her gaze, steady and unwavering. She broke first. Of course she did. That night, she refused to sleep. I heard her pacing the bedroom, muttering to herself, flinching at every sound. So I made sure there were plenty of them. A soft knock on the wall. A drawer left slightly open when she swore she had closed it. The whisper of fabric brushing against the floor. She cracked the bedroom door open, peering out into the dark hallway. I know you're out there, she called. Silence. Then, just as she was about to shut the door, I let my shadow stretch across the floor, long and distorted by the dim hallway light. Her sharp inhale told me everything I needed to know. I stepped back into the darkness. She slammed the door. By the next morning, she was barely holding it together. She had stopped eating, stopped smiling, stopped pretending. When I walked into the kitchen, she was standing by the counter, gripping a cup of coffee so tightly I thought it might shatter. She turned to me, her eyes hollow. I don't belong here. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a quiet, broken realization. I took a sip of my own coffee, savoring the taste. No, I said softly. You don't. She swallowed hard, nodding. Then she turned and walked away. I had won, but I wasn't done yet. Not until she shattered completely. That afternoon, I made sure to leave something in the bedroom. Something small, insignificant, but powerful. An old one, of my husband and me, laughing together on the front porch of this very house. Before her, before all of this, I placed it on her pillow. And then I waited. It didn't take long. Her scream of frustration was like music to my ears. She stormed out of the bedroom, her face twisted in rage. She found me in the hallway and shoved the photo into my hands. You did this on purpose. I blinked at her. What are you talking about? This. She pointed at the picture, her breathing erratic. You're rubbing it in my face. Every single day, you remind me that this was yours first. I stared at the photograph, tilting my head as if seeing it for the first time. Oh, I must have forgotten it there. Liar. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I met her gaze, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled. That was it. That was the moment she broke. With a strangled cry, she threw the photograph to the ground, shoving past me as she stumbled down the hallway. A few seconds later, I heard the front door slam shut. I exhaled, slow and satisfied. She was gone. For now. But soon, she'd realize what I already knew. She wasn't coming back. The silence after she left was different. For the first time in months, it wasn't tense. It wasn't filled with the weight of unspoken battles, the lingering scent of someone who didn't belong, or the sound of hesitant, fearful footsteps in the hallway. It was a silence that belonged to me. I stood in the center of the living room, letting it settle around me like an old, familiar embrace. The house no longer felt like a war zone. The energy had shifted. It was as if the walls, the floors, even the very air had been waiting for her departure to breathe again. She was gone, and she wasn't coming back. At first, my husband didn't believe it. She just needs time, he had muttered, rubbing his temples when he realized she wasn't answering his calls. She'll calm down. I said nothing, because I knew the truth. I had made sure she would never feel safe here, never feel wanted here. And that kind of fear, that kind of exhaustion, it lingers long after you leave. She had left behind a few things: shoes kicked off by the door, a half-empty bottle of perfume on the dresser, a jacket draped over the back of a chair. Little pieces of her, as if she was planning to come back. But I knew better. She had run out of here like she was escaping something dark and twisted. And in her mind, she wasn't coming back for her perfume. She wasn't coming back for her shoes. She wasn't coming back for him. It took 3 days before it truly hit him. I found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone, his thumb scrolling through unanswered texts. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. He looked like a man on the edge. I took my time making my coffee, letting the scent of it fill the air, letting him sit in his misery for a little longer. Finally, he spoke. She won't talk to me. I hid my smirk behind my mug. That's a shame. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time in weeks. You don't seem surprised. I tilted my head. Should I be? His jaw tightened. He was thinking about all the little things, the whispers of paranoia she had let slip, the way I had remained calm through it all, the way I had watched. And then it hit him. I had done this. The realization flickered in his eyes like a dying ember, but he said nothing. Maybe he was afraid to. I set my coffee down and leaned against the counter, watching him. You look tired. His nostrils flared. This isn't funny. I smiled. I'm not laughing. He exhaled sharply and pushed back his chair. I need some air. And just like that, he walked out the front door. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was alone in my home. I started in the bedroom. The sheets smelled like her. It made my skin crawl. I stripped the bed bare, yanking off every last reminder of her presence, throwing the sheets into a garbage bag. The perfume bottle on the dresser? Smashed. Her clothes still in the closet? Dumped into a donation bin. I erased her. By the time I was done, the room felt like mine again. The air was lighter, the space no longer tainted. But I wasn't finished yet. I moved through the house, slowly, methodically, cleansing every last inch of what they had tried to take from me. The couch where they sat too close together? Gone. The wine glasses they used? Shattered. The energy they brought into this house? Erased. By the time the sun had set, I stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. It was mine again. Completely. My husband came home late that night. I was sitting on the porch, watching the stars, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. He stepped out slowly, hesitantly, as if expecting me to lash out, to scream, to cry. But I just watched him. He walked up the steps, hands in his pockets, stopping a few feet away from me. You threw her stuff away. I shrugged. She wasn't coming back for it. He exhaled, running a hand down his face. I can't believe she left. I tilted my head. Why not? You did. His face twisted. That's not the same. I let the silence stretch between us, my gaze never wavering. He knew it was the same. After a moment, he sat down beside me, staring out into the dark. He didn't speak, and I didn't fill the silence. Because there was nothing left to say. I had won, and he knew it. That night, I slept with the windows open, letting the cool breeze drift in. For the first time in a long time, I didn't dream of whispers in the hallway, of stolen kisses in my kitchen, of a woman laughing in my bed. The house was mine again. I woke up with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. I stretched, let the sunlight warm my face, and breathed in the fresh, clean air of a home that finally felt whole again. The nightmare was over, and I had survived it,